Greetings and welcome to ECCN 4.1. On behalf of the Education and Crisis and Conflict Network, I'm happy to welcome you to today's webinar, Early Childhood Development and Social Cohesion, part of the Education and Crisis and Conflict Network Learning Series. Our learning series is meant to help members access, apply, and share evidence, resources, and tools related to topics drawn from USAID's Education and Crisis and Conflict Learning Agenda. My name is Susan Ross, and I'm the Learning Network lead for the Global Reading Network. USAID's 2018 education policy expanded the scope of education programming to include pre-primary education and child well-being, both vital components of effective, holistic early childhood development. I'm really excited to hear today more about the important work our partners have been doing in this space in the context of crisis and conflict. While we are presenting in English today, live interpretation is available in French and Spanish. To access the French or Spanish channel, please select the corresponding channel from the interpretation icon at the bottom or top of your screen. If you have any questions about Zoom functionality, please private message ECCN by searching the participant list. This is a reminder that we are recording this session. It will be available on the Leading Through Learning Global Platform YouTube channel after the event. Before we dive in, I have a few reminders for you. First, closed captioning is available in English. To access this, click on the CC icon at the bottom or top of your screen. Second, we invite you to post questions or comments in the chat as you are listening. We will monitor the chat for questions as we go. Third, please make sure you are muted and your camera is off to preserve bandwidth. Finally, remember that we are recording this and it will be shared publicly after the event. The Education and Crisis and Conflict Network and the LAC Regional Hub are part of the USAID Leading Through Learning Global Platform, which includes two other global learning networks, the Higher Education Learning Network and the Global Reading Network, as well as LTLGP representatives in Africa and in Latin America and the Caribbean. We hope that in addition to staying tuned to the ECCN, you'll be interested in collaboration across the platform. If you're not already a member, you can register now to receive invites to future events for all the networks and chapters, as well as other opportunities to convene with fellow members and engage. Now I'll turn it over to our partners from Sesame Workshop.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Carolina Casas, Vice President of International Education for Sesame Workshop. Welcome to the third and final webinar of our ECD and Social Cohesion learning cohort. The Leading Through Learning Global Platform and Sesame Workshop decided to join forces to organize this webinar series to provide a convening space for researchers, practitioners, and decision makers working in the space of early childhood development and social cohesion, to document and expand the vibrant and important field that is emerging at the intersection of these two areas of programming, and to take initial steps to synthesize these discussions and findings in an annotated compendium from the webinar series and the information you have kindly shared with us through the survey. We framed this webinar series around three driving questions. First, how do strategies and outcomes related to early childhood care and development and to social cohesion support one another? Are there relevant theories of change that reflect these relationships? Second, what do successful programming and interventions look like in this space? And third, what evidence do we have about the linkages between ECCD and social cohesion? Is this evidence reflective of crisis and conflict settings? What critical questions are unanswered? In line with these questions, the first two webinars focused on theories of change and promising practices in programming. Today, we will put the spotlight on evidence and approaches to measurement. Before we go into our presentations, I would like to share a few insights that have emerged when seeing these presentations as a whole. We have heard presentations that include programming developed across 17 countries, 16 of which are in the Global South, mainly South Asia, the Middle East, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Latin America. Out of the 9 presentations that we've highlighted during this series, 5 focused on the programming created to address the needs of displaced populations. This is an accomplishment that we don't take lightly, as we started this collaboration out of shared awareness of the dearth of information on the connection between ECD and social cohesion in contexts affected by crisis and conflict. In terms of identifying the pathways that connect ECD and social cohesion, the initiatives showcased so far have outlined 3 distinct possibilities. One that I will call the direct and explicit approach, which delivers social cohesion curricula to young children either as a standalone or as part of whole child development programs. Then there is the direct and implicit approach that focuses on transforming the ways in which learning environments and other child-facing services operate to ensure that pedagogical and administrative practices, among others, reinforce the goals of social cohesion. And then the ripple effects approach, which relies on the long-term effects and positive externalities of bringing communities together to improve access to early childhood care and education and strengthen parenting practices, especially in underserved communities. Most programs featured reference in some ways the socio-ecological model, aiming to engage children, parents, educators, and other community members. However, a common theme that we've heard, especially in webinar 2, was the importance of whole family approaches. Increasing protective factors for families, promoting male caregiver engagement, integrating mental health and psychosocial support, and addressing the prevalence of harsh discipline practices were all mentioned as strategic actions that can nurture family cohesion, as well as children's individual resilience to withstand negative coping strategies in the face of crisis or scarcity. Finally, we've also seen a common theme around evidence and the need to improve the measures and frameworks that we have available to trace the connections between education and development interventions during the early years and social cohesion outcomes, both within the duration of said interventions and over time. We've heard from partners that are using measurement tools focused on developmental milestones, others focused on children's emotional well-being, improvements on classroom climate, and changes in caregiving practices. Others are using participatory monitoring tools and qualitative research methods to establish relationships that aren't always explicit in program designs and theories of change. As you can see, we have learned a lot together, and I'm certain that we will learn more today as we go more in depth into the subject of evidence and approaches to measurement. Before I hand over the mic to my colleague, Shanna Khan, to facilitate the panel discussion, I want to reiterate something that we have said in the past 2 webinars. We come together today with a shared understanding that young children have a vital place in efforts to build stable, peaceful, and cohesive societies. It is my sincere hope that as we wrap up this webinar series, that this shared conviction continues to fuel both our work and our desire to collaborate. Thank you. Shanna, over to you.
Thank you so much, Carolina. My name is Shanna Cohn, and I'm Director of International Education at Sesame Workshop. I ask that as you listen to the following presentations, please use the Jamboard, which we'll put in the chat, to document any questions for our presenters. Today, we will hear from Dr. Kim Folds from Sesame Workshop, Idalia Rodriguez Morales from the International Rescue Committee, and Fatma Abdul Wahab and Nina Crump, also from Sesame Workshop. Now I'm pleased to pass the mic over to our first presenter, Kim.
Thank you, Shauna. Hi, everyone. I'm Kim Folds, Vice President of Content Research and Evaluation at Sesame Workshop, as Shauna mentioned. For our work on play-based assessment of self and belonging to support social cohesion, today I'm going to focus on the development of these tools in Colombia, where we're working with Venezuelan migrants and Colombian host community in Bogota. Leveraging social cohesion programming funded by Hilton Foundation, we are developing a play-based assessment of children's sense of self and belonging to address a gap in existing and appropriate measures for young children. We are basing the pilot on pre-pilot insights collected from children ages 4 to 8 and their parent caregiver, recruiting from Venezuelan migrant and Colombian host community families currently participating in the program. The measure will be designed for in-person direct child assessment, though we would like to eventually develop a remote adaptation. We envision this measure, funded by LEGO Foundation, could be implemented as a classroom assessment, monitoring tool, or evaluation measure, though we are currently developing it as an outcomes measure. The preschool years are vital to the prevent the onset of bias and prejudice by fostering healthy identities and providing environments that support a sense of belonging for every child. Communities transformed by migration struggle to maintain the links of social cohesion necessary for successful integration and appropriate child development. Strains on scarce resources, fear, and prejudice can result in serious tensions between displaced and host communities. Exposure to discriminatory practices and rhetoric can impact children's well-being, development of positive identities, and the ability to participate fully in learning experiences. Despite the critical importance of measuring these two distinct but interrelated concepts in young children, there remain critical gaps in the availability of validated, developmentally appropriate play-based measures specific to preschool-age children, 3 to 6, to test their sense of self-concept and appreciation of diverse identities in their peers. Existing measures for these constructs often rely on child interviews and/or sorting tasks that rely on physical markers of difference. The value of direct child assessment measures for use in monitoring program quality and impact is that they facilitate a more accurate and relevant understanding of child development. An additional gap in existing measures is their relevance for diverse global communities, including humanitarian contexts. Existing measures have tended to be validated on or for weird contexts, Western educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic context. There's a critical need to better understand and assess children's sense of self and appreciation of diverse identities across the Middle East, North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and Latin America. This need is even more pronounced for children whose communities have been transformed by conflict and displacement. While there have been efforts to develop contextualized programming in humanitarian settings to support children's sense of self and appreciating diverse identities, the building blocks of social cohesion, the need for developmentally appropriate play-based measures to assess changes in knowledge and behavior remains across the spectrum of classroom assessment, program monitoring, and impact evaluations. Once we have completed this activity in June, we expect to have a validated measure available in Spanish. The measure will be available in English, but would only have been piloted or validated in Spanish. We will prepare a guidance note for others to adapt, pilot, validate in other diverse contexts globally. We're hopeful to adapt this to our global work around self and belonging, which is currently also being implemented in Uganda, Ecuador, Iraq, and the United States. We plan on holding a webinar to introduce the measure more deeply, as well as bring in others currently developing play-based measures in humanitarian contexts like RTI and NYU. Timing for that is still TBD. We have completed one pre-pilot phase with the second planned for later this month. The full pilot rollout is planned for later this year. So while our findings are limited, important learnings have emerged. We have tested multiple mechanics and found that finger puppets, sliders, faces ranging from happy to sad to mimic a Likert scale, modeling clay, drawings, and storytelling to assess their appropriateness, relevance, and engagement as possible mechanics for the measure itself. We found that all were engaging with the exception of storytelling. We were not able to consistently get children to tell stories. We found that some children don't yet know how to tell stories or have trouble remembering stories, which is all exacerbated by developing oral fluency for some of the younger children. While the others were engaging, there were still useful notes to improve on those mechanics. Overall, finger puppets proved to be the most engaging and promising. We found that it offered children more freedom to engage. For the sliders, if we use this mechanic, we'll need to use something other than faces because we found that children associated the faces with different emotions, which affected their responses. Children also benefited from a more active mechanic and were bored more easily in this activity. For constructs, we found that children understood their identities through food, holidays, customs, and pets and animals. The latter may be a proxy for class, those who have pets versus those who live near animals, but this requires further investigation. Diverse identities were more challenging for young children. Children did not recognize one nationality over another, often confusing the concept of neighborhood with country, thinking a friend of the same nationality who lives in another neighborhood lives in another country. We found that stories of physical difference were more salient around diverse identities, particularly dark skin color and curly hair texture. The role of language came up, but rarely. One parent mentioned a story about their child asking why another child speaks differently, and they explained it's because the child comes from a different country. Finally, some teachers noted the intersection of ability and race, citing examples where teachers in schools may be ill-equipped to support the needs of Indigenous children with disabilities. We are using all of these learnings to inform the second phase of pre-pilot. I'm passing it back over to you, Shauna.
Thank you so much, Kim. Now we'll hear from our next presenter, which I believe is Adalia.
Hi. Thank you, Shauna. My name is Idalia Rodriguez Morales, and I am a researcher with the International Rescue Committee. The program that I will be focusing on today is Juégalo, which is a wordplay in Spanish with the word play. It was delivered in Bogotá, Medellín, and Cali in Colombia. The project had, really by design, a goal of positively impacting social cohesion. And through that leading idea that was communicated to and across teams, as well to and across implementing partners, the team really, even though that was communicated, the team really struggled on how to measure and conceptualize social cohesion. Recently, we conducted learning and reflection workshops with the team, partners, and other stakeholders as we prepare for the next steps of the project, including measurements. Today, I will present you the project, some initial results related to social cohesion, and where we plan to take it. The program, funded by LEGO Foundation, was designed with the children and play at the center of its ecosystem. Because it intended to impact social cohesion, it also centered in co-creation with community organizations and children. The focus of the program was ECD and early primary, so it was later expanded to teens in the community due to their interest. It included several delivery mechanisms, primarily the creation of sustainable play spaces, a community radio program, the street and community festivals, and more recently, mobile cabins for children-led and children-driven content production. The program centered in playful engagement as a learning pedagogy and as a mechanism for cohesion. For example, putting on air a fun and playful pedagogical radio community was during the COVID-19 closures. The program lasted 2.5 years with varying degrees of delivery across the cities. And for example, children would meet in the play spaces between 1 to 4 times a week for 1.5 or 2 hours. For monitoring the project, we conducted process evaluations using qualitative interviews and focus groups. As you might know, since 2015, over 4 million people have left Venezuela, and about 1 million Venezuelan refugees now live in Colombia, 20% of which are school-age children. This migratory pattern has affected the communities and sites in which the project was situated. Because the project was heavily based in co-creation and community organization, the identification and selection of such locations and the community of the spaces was very critical. Factors to be considered were infrastructure, engagement, the ability to have community-based organizations, 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 the ability And the availability to partner with a community-based organization. And well, the selection was a multi-step process which included field research with teams, just for them to make decisions based on the current realities of the communities and really assess whether communities and partners could align in terms of strategy, integration, and sustainability. Based on interviews and surveys, the selection of sites and partners was then based on interest, engagement from community leadership and principals, the availability to set play spaces, and focused on communities serving migrant populations with strong community-led organizations. The co-creation process was a project cornerstone from the start of the project during the program design. And the participation of children as change agents was an explicit priority for everyone involved. The participation of boys and girls was based on their capacity as political and community subjects, active in their development process, with agency and capacity to make decisions. The co-creation methodologies with children was playful, placing special attention to openness, accepting differences while trying to understand new perspectives and possibilities. In this slide, for example, we included the program image, which were logos and the design of which were based on children's drawings from the initial community engagement and interviews with children. The design and characteristics of the radio characters were also based in children's interviews. For children, 5 key socio-emotional competencies of self-knowledge, self-regulation, autonomy, empathy, and collaboration were nested in an approach starting with themselves, with others, and at their immediate spaces, and with the community. Overall, the project worked to develop a positive sense of themselves, for children to learn how to regulate their emotions, to work in collaboration, to value individual and collective achievement, resolve conflicts through dialogue, respect rules of coexistence in the classroom, at school and outside of school, acting with initiative, autonomy, and provision for learning. So far, the project has based the results in qualitative interviews with the partner community organizations at all levels, caregivers, children in public spaces, and the indicators have been mostly based on reach, rather than at outcome levels. Recently, we conducted a learning workshop with all relevant stakeholders and have findings from qualitative interviews. We have also developed more coherent plans for measurement of social cohesions, of which I will talk later. From our initial qualitative analysis, and if we could go back to the previous slide. Yeah, thank you. From initial qualitative analysis of interviews with partner community organizations and parents, really emerged that for participants, the project, really meant and had an impact on integration of diversity, regulating emotions, and play and collaborate with others through positive dialogue. For example, these are quotes from our education coordinators in the play spaces that highlight this. For example, one education coordinator mentioned, children from the Embera indigenous community, Venezuelan migrants, and host communities now all come to the Medellin play space to play. For 1.5 hours, they are all different and are involved through pedagogical intention. Children have also changed how they communicate with the Embera community members. They no longer call them by names, but use rather their actual names and played hand by hand. Parents also reported that the play spaces resulted in genuine spaces for participation and joy. For example, they reported that in a recent earthquake, children immediately found shelter in the play spaces as they recognized it as a safe space. The project also conducted community activities and street festivals, with the main purpose of promote play as a right, showcasing and taking spaces to play and learn to strengthen social cohesion, strategy, and build community bonds by appropriating urban spaces for children to re-inhabit and enjoy in multiple ways. These festivals were also co-created with the community through workshops, with children and their caregivers for them to share their opinions and perspectives about the meaning for each festival. For example, Through play and community ownership, the Cali Festival demonstrated that Jujujuegalo initiatives encourage social strengthening processes and have the potential to be sustainable. 11 strategic partners and education stakeholders participated in the festival. Among them, the secretariats and programs of the Cali Mayor's Office, with whom the message and the importance of play as a fundamental right was shared. As a result, the IRC team later participated in the 6th Mesa Distrital de la Primera Infancia with key institutional actors, which is a key space to continue the advocacy for play spaces for children in local communities. We really see this policy and advocacy result as directly tied not only with the display of fun and community at the event, but also as a sign of the strong involvement of the community in each step of the process. In Medellin, for example, the objective of the festival was part of a strategy to recover public spaces in a district which has been previously associated with danger and insecurity. With the appropriation of the Botero Square, the festival demonstrated that these spaces could be inclusive and participatory. Interviews after the festival, participants shared that play brings us closer together and it strengthens our social skills regardless of age, gender, and socioeconomic level. In Bogota, the festival was named Juju a la calle. This means in the street, as a way of showcasing how the use of streets in the community can be redefined and transformed into safe spaces for families, children, for all of to play, considering the difficult situations that they were part of the neighborhood reality. The project in Bogota also showed a very strong process of participation and co-creation of children, adolescents, and caregivers. A quote from a community member said, Jujujuegalo's goals coincide with the particular interest that this community has in the development of social-emotional skills. This will strengthen us in the achievement of the objectives in the social-emotional field that we are seeking and working on with great dedication and commitment. The other project component, Al Aire with Enrique, is a radio program where children explore themes with a friendly migrant chameleon who intends to find its way into the world. In his interview program, Enrique, who is the chameleon, comments on the news and invite other animals from the aldea, which is the city he arrives to sing, enjoy, and express his feelings and opinions. The radio program was based also on co-creation activities with children, and interview themes emerged from the topics suggested by children. The radio program was one of the initial activities of the project, intended to provide children, back when they were still COVID restrictions, with a safe space and a fun space in which to learn and understand from community dynamics, to develop healthy social-emotional skills. From interviews with parents, we learned that the content was not just helpful for children, but also for adults in the community. For example, parents commented that some episodes in which Enrique is exploring his new home, the aldea, as a new recently arrived migrant, and they beginning to relate with other community members, help them figure out how to frame positive interactions in such scenarios with children, and how to communicate openness and empathy. So far, we have collected qualitative interviews, as well as peer reflection and program learning workshops. At this stage, we have developed plans to more coherently conceptualize and measure not just outcomes, but our final long-term impact of social cohesion, understood not as causal, but as really the long-term impact for the project. For this, we have the following plans. First, we conducted a comprehensive systematic review to determine existing quantitative instruments that could assess the quality of school climate and social dynamics from children's voice specifically, and also specifically in connection with bullying and victimization and its relationship with learning. Our findings, which we hope to share more broadly soon, point out to something we have already seen, that most of the tools were based on the global north and developed in non-emergency settings, and also focused on broad issues such as psychosocial support. However, using that evidence as a base, we are developing a new instrument that will cover internal school or site dynamics, including xenophobia, bullying, and victimization, as well as well as the relationship with the broader community. We also plan to use children participatory research in a more formal way, though children have been critical creators throughout. For example, as I showed, all the community events, logos, and other different dissemination activities were really inspired by drawings made by children participants. Now, we plan to conduct a retrospective research with children, analyzing the photos of themselves in the play spaces and analyze how the play space has evolved. This will be done using a tool for play and learning through children's eyes, which has been developed by LEGO and other partners, and we think this could be a very good opportunity to test and validate it. We additionally have included in our protocol ad hoc questions that have been developed and integrated from our reflections and initial findings. We also plan to use social network analysis for assessing the sustainability of Huhu. We have designed research to analyze key champions in the community, either key parents, members of the community, or even our education coordinators, who were a critical piece of the success of the program. We will run this social network survey in all sites and communities to identify which individual community characteristics had the strongest impact in Huhu's diffusion within the community and the relevant stakeholders. We also plan to measure social capital and make a differentiation between social capital and social cohesion, for which we are also conducting a review. This is really our attempt to untangle both concepts, which can be understood in the similar vein, but which have different conceptual and social underpinnings, which could have, and we are sure will have, measurement implications. Beyond these measurements, an insight that will guide the next steps of our research, we also have the following lessons learned. First, we strongly believe that participatory monitoring needs to be planned and streamlined from the beginning and continually revisited during the program to be responsive. We also think that identifying and selected well-connected and engaged community organizations is very critical, as well as the co-creation with all the partner organizations to achieve content relevance, recognition, and also strive for sustainability, and ultimately being able to target social cohesion. We also strongly believe that the development and the selection of our play professionals was key, as well as allowing them for spaces for them to share their experiences and maintain connections throughout. And finally, we are also believers that the continuous multi-stakeholder review that we conducted were really essential on the success of the program. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you so much, Adalia. That was really informative. And now I'll pass the mic to our final presenters, Nina and Fatima.
Thank you, Shanna. My name is Nina Crump. I'm a senior education manager for education team in Latin America with Sesame Workshop. Our case study focuses on a program titled Welcome Sesame, Inclusion and Belonging for Displaced Learners, which was developed by Sesame Workshop, a global impact nonprofit with a mission to help children everywhere grow smarter, stronger, and kinder. For over half a century, our deep knowledge of early childhood development has allowed us to tackle issues ranging from emotional well-being to racism. For this case study, we'll be in 2 continents in 2 different countries, Colombia and Uganda. Welcome Sesame, Inclusion and Belonging for Displaced Learners aims to enhance the structures, practices, and curricula of early learning settings in refugee and migrant hosting communities to support inclusion and belonging for all learners and unlock the potential of ECD as a driver of social cohesion. Welcome Sesame consists of a media-enriched instructional program for 5-year-olds delivered over 16 weeks through lesson plans and classroom routines, and a professional development process that includes training workshops with educational practitioners and other key members of the educational community, and on-site accompaniment to support pedagogical appropriation. Welcome Sesame has been conceived as a learning project meant to be designed, tested, and refined over 3 implementation cycles. In the first cycle, which just concluded in early learning centers in the Invepi and Rino camp settlements in the West Nile region of Uganda, and in the boroughs of Poza and Suwa in Bogota, Colombia, a total of 1,917 children and 87 educational practitioners participate. You might wonder why we chose Colombia and Uganda as places where we could develop this program. Let's take a quick survey to see what arguments could have led to this decision. In fact, all of these statements are true. This made working across these 2 contexts appealing. Even though the way in which early learning happens in each are different, there are meaningful cultural and infrastructure differences that affect how the program is operated in each location. Both countries receive a large amount of migration, but they also have important specific characteristics to protect children from vulnerability. Now, I'll turn over to my colleague Fatima to discuss our approach to evidence and measurement.
Thank you, Nina. My name is Fatima Abdel Wahab, and I am Senior Manager of International Education at Sesame Workshop. As already mentioned, this multi-year project was designed from its inception as a learning project. To materialize this vision, we set up structures for sustained real-time learning and improvement. It all started with situational analyses and needs assessments in each country to understand the realities of displaced and host community children and their families. This informed the content development of what is now Welcome Sesame, which underwent rounds of review by local stakeholders and formative testing to ensure its appropriateness and relevance. The first of 3 implementation cycles in each country started earlier this year and wrapped up a few months ago. This cycle will be the focus of the rest of this presentation. We are currently refining the content and strategy based on what we learned in preparation for the second implementation cycle, starting in early 2024. There will be a second round of content and strategy refinement prior to the 3rd cycle, which will entail an impact evaluation. This will be followed by the dissemination of the program. The primary focus of our learning agenda for the first cycle of implementation was understanding the program's feasibility of implementation and acceptability to participants, given that we had never implemented it before. We also wanted to understand how we could refine it for future cycles. Furthermore, we wanted to obtain preliminary evidence of whether it leads to increases in knowledge and use of practices that promote positive intergroup relationships for children, caregivers, and educational practitioners. Based on this learning agenda, we crafted our learning plan, which consisted of a mixed methods approach, including focus group discussions, key informant interviews, ethnographic observations, and surveys with closed and open-ended questions, as well as ongoing communication between partners and local program teams in country and between countries. Partners and participants were also integrated in content review, formative research, and pause and reflect sessions that informed program refinement. Furthermore, opportunities were created for team members from both countries to work together in program design and refinement as part of our efforts to strengthen South-to-South collaboration. This was further enhanced by collaborating with local research partners. In these upcoming slides, I'll share a few representative findings related to Welcome Sesame and social cohesion. The first being on the training process, which created an opportunity for educational practitioners to come together to share reflections and practices, which led them to work more collaboratively, as illustrated by this quote. What do I take with me from the program? Strategies to resolve everyday conflicts, a way to support the families I work with, and the value of sharing with and learning from my fellow educational practitioners. The family workshops provide an opportunity for caregivers to connect meaningfully with other caregivers, which led them to build community, as conveyed by this quote. The family workshop and the rest of the Sesame program has helped us interact freely with other people, brought unity among different tribes. We look at ourselves as one, We always work together. We have also learned how to handle our emotions. The program has enabled us to build leadership skills for our families and community. And lastly, children use the strategies from the program themselves and encourage peers and family members to use them with strengthened relationships as seen in these quotes. Apologizing when we do something to our peers is important to resolving conflicts. From a 6-year-old child in Colombia and from a caregiver in Colombia, Welcome Sesame has been very beneficial. For example, my son now tells me, "Mommy, act like a tree," when he sees I'm feeling stressed. And I will hand over to you, Nina.
Now we share some of our key findings related to evidence and measurement. As illustrated by the quotes we just saw, being able to learn from multiple perspectives was key to understanding the different manifestations of the impact of Sesame Workshop on social cohesion for different participant groups. Learning directly from children requires creativity and keen listening. Employing a mixed methods approach enabled a deeper understanding. In particular, the use of qualitative data at this point in program design provided rich information to refine the program and understand changes in social cohesion dynamics.
Our main lesson today is that tools like participatory monitoring can help understand the relationship between programming like Welcome Sesame and social cohesion. We recommend collecting qualitative data from multiple perspectives to inform continuous improvement and understand nuance by complementing learning from quantitative data. A potential risk is ending up with an unanalyzable amount of data, so keep it simple and streamlined. It is critical to prioritize the needs of participants around literacy and language, as well as the realities of the context. A recommendation to achieve this is to collaborate with local partners to ensure appropriateness of tools and approaches. Involve multiple stakeholders in the learning process at strategic points. The more perspectives, the richer the learning. As we learn that the data collection process itself also has the potential to strengthen social cohesion. We'll close by sharing a bit about what comes next for Welcome Sesame. We are currently refining all aspects of the program based on what we learned from the initial implementation cycle and preparing for the next implementation cycle, which entails increased reach in Colombia and Uganda and expanding to Ecuador. For the second cycle, our approach to evidence and measurement will focus on understanding program fidelity and replicability. We will also take the cycle as an opportunity to pilot measurement tools for impact evaluation that will happen during the third implementation cycle. This will include the tool that was the focus of Kim's presentation today. And all along the way, we plan to continue learning with multiple stakeholders. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Fatima and Nina. So before, as with other webinars, before we launch into group discussion, I'd like to highlight a few key themes that I heard from our 3 presentations. First, what I heard is learning directly from children requires creativity. We heard about the use of finger puppets, sliders, modeling clay, and drawing from Kim, and we also heard about co-creation with children from Adalia. Second, employing a mixed methods approach seems to enable a deeper understanding of how the program interacts with social cohesion dynamics, which is key for such a sensitive topic. And lastly, we heard how important it is to understand social cohesion dynamics going into a project and collaborate with local partners to ensure appropriateness of tools and approaches, including language and cultural sensitivity. So now I'm going to move to the Jamboard for some audience questions. And I think aligned with that last point, I thought there was an interesting question for Adalia, which is, how is social cohesion understood by the participating communities? Is this work coming from an explicit community need?
Yeah, during all the different interviews that we realized, we really, this was a really specific finding in which communities were really concerned about ties, about security concerns, about even very basic things like knowing new people, knowing their neighbors. So I think even though the social cohesion, and we really, during interviews, we didn't really narrow down into a single definition, we realized that it was a very, very important component in all of our interviews. I think this was really explicit, particularly with the play festivals that we did in the streets, especially during the co-creation processes. And I think there were a lot of worries about violence, about the different difficulties that all these neighborhoods were happening. And it was like a really important and really common finding, like just trying to mention, maybe if I knew more of my community, maybe if I knew more of the parents that are also attending the same school as my children, I think there was like a clear interest in doing so, but really also mentioning like a lack of spaces and opportunities to do so. So I think though they really never explicitly mentioned social cohesion, it was really something that was underlying in a lot of their different interactions with us.
That's really interesting. So not necessarily using the term social cohesion, but in some of their concerns. Great, thank you. I guess related to that, there's another question about the distinction you made between social capital and social cohesion. So maybe I'll move to that. When you say that you'll differentiate measurement of social capital and social cohesion, are you thinking of child level measures? Can you say more about the difference?
We are not really thinking about child level measures, but rather more at a community level. And this was something that also emerged from different interviews, that sometimes the communities in which migrants arrive seem to be more cohesive than others. So I think that was, from starters, like an interesting interplay between the migrants communities and the host communities, and that were really affecting their experiences as they arrived. And we also realized that sometimes the migrant communities, even though they would arrive and they'd be new, they would already have certain social capital. They would and this is something that we explored because of the migrant corridors and because these cities have been really already affected by all these different migratory patterns, that they sometimes would arrive and they would already have like a specific social capital in terms of they would know someone to ask to, or they would know a person that knew a person. So even though they wouldn't really directly integrate into the cohesiveness or lack of cohesiveness of the actual community, the capital that they would arrive with was different. And sometimes when they were traveling together, for example, they would also be forming different bonds. So I think that's where the interest is now, is in really trying to untangle the social capital, mainly from the newly arrived migrants, and the social cohesion is maybe more directly tied into the communities that they arrived in. So that's why we sort of want to make that distinction more clearly through the social network analysis.
That makes sense. That's so interesting. Thank you. I'll move to a question for Kim. So Kim, the question is, can you elaborate more on how you would think this tool would be helpful in other contexts in which markers of difference are more visible, or in places in which religion is a factor?
That's a great question. Well, I think what's interesting is that we went into it making an assumption that other less visible forms of identity would become more salient throughout the pre-pilot, and that hasn't happened so far. We may see them become more salient in the second pre-pilot. I think what we want to develop is that it's how children see themselves. We want to see it, how whatever identities they prioritize, they have a stronger sense of self and pride in those identities, whether it's race, religion, nationality, language group, the whole host of identities that children may talk to us about, their gender identity, of course. So that's what we're trying to ultimately develop. And that's why we think using puppets will be helpful here, because they can then project the identities onto those puppets. Again, they will be determining what the most salient identities are for them. That's not something that we would determine. And then we want to see through any intervention, if we ran that again, certainly an improvement. And then the same for how they talk about others, of whether it's their own identity groups or different identity groups. So really it's drawing from them. That's ultimately we want to develop something that leads from whatever children are sharing with us.
Really interesting. I think I'm biased asking this question because I've heard a little about it myself, but maybe you could talk a little bit about how puppets are used, like what role they play in helping children project.
Yeah, so there's been, several decades of work around the importance of puppets, is that it's really tough for children and adults to talk directly about tough topics, and through puppets, and we would argue Muppets, it's easier for children to talk about things that may be uncomfortable or they've never really discussed directly with people they know, much less enumerators who they're less familiar with. And so puppets offer sort of, they can project onto this entity what it is that they're feeling. And so it serves as sort of a protective barrier when they're talking about these tough conversations.
Thank you so much.
I think we are both biased on the power of puppets and Muppets.
More important to start with that and make sure
Yes.
we're honest about that. Thank you, Kim. So I'll move to a question for Fatima and Nina. One question is, how replicable will this program be in other contexts, or how replicable do you think it will be? What were the main implications of designing it for such different situations in Colombia and Uganda?
Thank you, Shauna. I'll take a pass at this first question. And Nina, you can jump in with the additional. In terms of replicability, we're actually trying to learn that right now in this process, which is why we have 3 pilot cycles to gather more information and try to understand what is a model that we can kind of use as a standard or base across the board, and then what contextualizations and changes are needed in order to make it work depending on each context. So we're gathering information as we go along to kind of figure that out. So it's a learning process right now. Nina, is there anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would add to that I think that one of the successes that might make possible the replicability of the program is that there is participation of children and practitioners in building the meaning of the key concepts of the program. So most concepts of the program turn around like the human experience, like emotions, identity, self-identity, and community and relationships to other people around us. But I think we don't provide the specific definitions, but we expect communities to participate in building and signifying those terms. And I think that's what might make possible its replicability in very different contexts.
So Nina, it sounds like you're saying the program itself could be replicable, but including the process of making sure that messaging comes from the community. So it's more like we're replicating the process of how the program was built. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean that in the program design, I think important to allow enough space for participation and co-creation with children themselves, so we don't provide information that is specific to a context.
Makes sense. Thank you so much. I also, for both of you, another question. Were there any unexpected findings that surfaced during the data collection and analysis phases?
Yeah, there were definitely plenty. Let's see. I would say one of the big ones for Uganda was just the amount of joy that the family workshops and moments to connect brought for the community. It really strengthened the bond between teachers and parents, just having those opportunities to connect as parents with other parents whose children attend the same, classroom or center as your kids. That was a source of joy for them and a source of community building, and understanding others that you may not have communicated with or previously chatted with simply because they speak a different language or are from a different tribe. And so those opportunities created that space for open dialogue, for getting to know each other and break down some of those preconceptions that they may have had about each other, or just it created opportunities for that to happen, for those interactions to happen, which was the aim, of course, but it came out really strongly in a way that was really great and appreciated. And it also came out strongly during the community events that were highly valued.
Go ahead, Nina.
Yeah, I would add to that usually we see a decrease of attendance in, for example, family workshops as the program goes forward. And in this case, in Colombia, there was an increase of attendance of caregivers because they started talking to each other and telling other caregivers how interesting and useful was the information they were getting. And also we saw some small communities connect throughout those workshops, specifically in Colombia with Venezuelan mothers who had not necessarily talked to other people in their neighborhood because of all of the bias there's with Venezuelan communities, and they started creating groups, which was very interesting. And also, as the presentation illustrates, it was incredible to see how children that are so young became somehow agents of change in their families and in their neighborhoods by saying, for example, I think you're looking angry, let's do a belly breathing or tree pose. So there were amazing evidences throughout the process.
Thanks so much, Nina. It seems like another kind of common theme throughout all three of these webinars has been these secondary impacts, both the secondary impacts of social cohesion when that's not the explicit goal, but also the secondary impacts on adults, like when the focus of the program is kids, but adults are bringing the kids or it's bringing adults together. We're really seeing positive effects there too. That's interesting. Going back to the Jamboard, there are two questions about age groups, both for Kim and Adalia. So for Kim, the question was, what age groups are you targeting with this measure? And similarly for Adalia, what age groups will be covered by the new tool you're creating to assess social climate, school climate, and social relationships? Are there plans to make it broadly available? So maybe same question for both of you.
For the age, we that run the pre-pilot for 4 to 8. We would ideally want to be able to use it for 3 to 8, but only through pre-piloting and piloting will we be able to really confirm that it's appropriate for that full age range.
We are in a similar place. We were thinking 4 to 7, but it's a very good question because we have seen precisely different patterns and different communicating levels from children of different ages. So that is definitely something that is at the center of what we've been trying to test. We will hopefully go through a round of cognitive pretesting with different ages, and for sure we will try to make it publicly available.
Wonderful, thank you. And for those of you who didn't have your questions answered, I think there's opportunity definitely to follow up with us after the webinar, or we can try to send out responses to those. Thank you all, and thank you to our panelists. Susan, I'll pass over to you now for a final reflection activity.
Thank you, Shauna. And I will echo the thanks and appreciation to all of today's panelists and the panelists from the previous webinars. And just again, I'm Susan Ross. I'm actually the Learning Network lead for the Global Reading Network, and just here today to support the webinar. And now what we'd like to do is facilitate a conversation beginning to synthesize more or continuing to synthesize our learning from the past 3 sessions and talking more about how we might apply. And I think we've already heard examples of how we're applying, but to continue to apply what we've learned through this series to the work we do. So what I'd like you to do is turn your attention to these reflection questions on the screen now. It also there's a Jamboard link which has the same reflection questions. And what we like to do is ask you to in the Jamboard begin to think about and reflect on, provide some answers. First question is, what are the connections that you've identified between early childhood development and social cohesion outcomes throughout this series? Second, which approaches to programming in the space of early childhood development and social cohesion seem most relevant to your work? And then finally, what are the gaps in evidence regarding the connection between ECD and social cohesion that we feel are most urgent in the field? And if we have, so let's start with these 3 questions. If you could spend some time providing some responses in the Jamboard, we'll take a few minutes to do that individually. Then we'll reflect on these together. And if we have time, also talk a little bit more about maybe possibilities for future learning. So it's so if you could take a few minutes now and begin to put some responses in the Jamboard, that would be great. Great. Seeing some responses about more involvement of caregivers. Lots of connections through spillover effects. Very excited to learn about community-wide approaches. Good. Take another minute or 2. Okay. Maybe we could be seeing more coming in. Great. Why don't we can go ahead and let's reflect on our reflections together. And then start to see some of the common themes coming out, and then I might call on a few of our presenters to respond to some of these also. So with our first reflection question, what are the connections that you identified between early childhood development and social cohesion throughout our series? And there seems, and this came up in the comments that were in the discussion Shauna led earlier also, this notion of the connections due to spillover effect to adults and caregivers, for example. And that's an important connection, again, to be observed, which was observed, and to be perhaps considered more in future programming and studied more in future programming. Oops, sorry. Involving caregivers seems is key. Important to seems to how to foster participation and engage with them. So I'm wondering if the whoever shared that reflection seems like again a great learning, and we've heard that referred to throughout today. Could you talk a little bit more about what you particularly see about how you might consider involving caregivers, how and when in programming going forward, and how you might better engage them and foster their participation? If you're able to come off mute and respond and share a little bit more about that reflection, that would be great.
Hi, Susan, that was me. And
Hi,
I think it was just very interesting to me to hear from the other case study on how they saw the participation of parents and caregivers not to decline but actually increase, because we didn't really saw that in our case, only for particular activities. So I think that for me continues to be a remaining question. Especially because sometimes we would find, and this would be something that parents would even share very directly with us, being like, I cannot, I need to keep working, like I can't really take time off work, like, so I think we try to be very careful on how to do that, but I think in some cases we were more successful than in others. So I think to me that continues to be a puzzle, really. How do we do it correctly?
Thank you. Right, how do we do it to get the most out of their involvement, but not to create additional burdens, and make it meaningful for the caregivers as well. Good question, very good question, and definitely something to give more thought to. And along those lines, the notion of just participatory design overall, and with our audiences, and really helping us to get to the context specific needs in each of the contexts in which we work. I'll ask again if the person who shared that idea wants to say that reflection, wants to say a little bit more. And how, again, that learning you could take going forward. And there's another comment about continuous and participatory pause and reflect. Again, the ongoing participatory design. So a common reflection from all of you. Any last thoughts on the connections between ECD and social cohesion that we learned about throughout the series? Anyone want to come off mute and say anything more? Okay. If not, I'm going to go on to our second reflection question. And which approaches to programming seem most relevant to your specific work? And again, a number of comments about the importance of a community-wide approach, really involving multiple stakeholders in the community. And then a second common reflection we've heard again throughout the presentations today and here on our reflection board, the importance of play-based and parenting approaches. It seems like there was a lot of helpful learning from the specific examples we've been sharing. And a question about curious about two-generation programming. Good question. I wonder if anyone can say anything more about their experience with two-generation programming, if in fact you have, that has been a component of your programming, or maybe if you share that same question. We will, this Jamboard will stay open, and there's going to be a chance to continue to add to this, and then we'll have a final worksheet for you all to hopefully also contribute to, which will be uploaded to our compendium. So all of these reflections we can continue, and they will help us to think through where we can go overall with next with applying our learning. Okay, I'm going to move on to the reflection question 3. What are the gaps in evidence about the connection between early childhood and development social cohesion that feel most urgent for the fields? Longitudinal effects, really, over time, what are the changes, the differences we're going to see? Perhaps, again, the idea of spillover effects, really understanding how the program might have effects beyond and impacts beyond our direct participants. Again, long-term effects, and then comprehensive and appropriate measurement tools, especially for the Global South. So the most urgent questions seem to be really understanding over time, and adapting over time, and understanding the long-term effects and what we're seeing beyond the direct participants in the programs. Any other thoughts on the evidence gaps? And again, we heard a lot of examples of how that our work is continuing to look at that. Kim, you came off.
Yeah, I just wanted to
add,
yeah, hi Susan. Thanks for these points, because I think I don't want to speak for my colleagues on the phone, but we would love to be able to develop longitudinal evidence coming out of this. I think one of the biggest challenges are around, frankly, funding structures. They're not set up to do longitudinal studies. They may be doing like a 2-year, which would be great because we don't even have that, but that's not really longitudinal. And these are really tough concepts, right? That you're going to see really the effects on social cohesion several years, maybe 10 years down the road, right? Like these are transformational concepts that you really wouldn't see within just a single, like a program year. So I really very much appreciate that point.
Thank you. Thank you. Agreed. Agreed. Any other thoughts on this reflection question?
Yeah, just kind of as having been a little bit behind the curtain in the process of putting together this learning cohort, I think it's really interesting to see the various approaches to measurement that are coming, that were presented today, but also that were presented in the prior 2 webinars, because everyone is tracking their learnings in one way or another. So I felt that there was a lot, like a continuous feeling about what's not being captured. We started during the first webinar in the series, discussing how sometimes even the program's theories of change don't capture some of these connections, but they start coming through kind of the practice of implementing a program. And that was certainly reinforced in the second webinar, but like generally just all these spillovers from programming in the ECD space and how they are affecting direct participants, but also people who are indirectly connected to the program staff, communities at large, community stakeholders and leaders, etc., which I thought was also very interesting based on the approach that we heard from Idalia today. So I think there is a great space for collaboration across programs in terms of like sharing some of these practices and approaches to measurement. But also hopefully in the future, the idea of building a joint learning agenda that we could pursue more collaboratively across organizations. Again, as Kim mentioned, funding structures often go against this desire, but I do feel that some of these bigger questions about how early childhood programming can contribute to other kinds of social goods beyond the individual benefits for the child do require kind of a collaborative practice to become evident.
Thank you. Very, very important, and I'm sure there's agreement among all the participants. And if you permit me, I'm going to take off my facilitator cap for a moment and put on my GRN cap. One question I have is sort of looking at a spillover effect as kids continue in their learning trajectory, and will kids who are in programs which do look both at ECD and social cohesion, will it make a difference when they get into more formal pre-primary or primary school, and will that prepare them for learning at different levels in a whole other way? It's a curiosity that's come to my mind, being part of this webinar today. Any last thoughts? And I will add that to the Jamboard later. Any last thoughts on question number 3? And if not, we'll move to question number 4, and also just what more would you like to learn? And there's one comment, and I think we all share this, more about measuring social cohesion. So lots of interest and really engagement and energy around this. So very exciting, very exciting. Any last comments? If not, just really want to thank you all for, again, the presentations and the participation throughout the series. And the Jamboard will remain open, so we want to encourage you to continue to contribute. And we have also created a worksheet that I think Molly has already put into the chat that highlights key themes from each of our 3 sessions and provides a space to think more about how you can apply your learning from this series. So if you could please download that, and like you to invite you to fill it out, continue your reflection, and then upload that document to our shared drive so that we can look back on potential applications for our learning as we create the annotated compendium. Again, links to the Jamboards we have used throughout the series are also available for your reference. And with that, I'm going to turn back over to Kristen for some action items and final reminders as we close out the series.
Thank you so much, Susan. For some final closing housekeeping items, I'd like to share a final reminder echoing Susan's that you can find all materials from all of our sessions in our Google group chats here. Additionally, please explore the resource library to peruse program documents shared by cohort members. We'd also encourage you to keep adding other materials you'd like to share. These will be used to inform the final compendium document, so anything you can share would be incredibly helpful. For next steps on the annotated compendium, we will continue to review and distill the common themes that we've seen through the presentations. We hope to have a draft by the end of January 2024. If you'd like to participate in either drafting or reviewing, please fill out the sign-up form included in the chat. This form will close on November 30th at 11:59 ET. We will share the compendium with members of the learning cohort early in the new year to request their support on review and refinement. The final draft will be released on Sesame Workshop and USAID's ECCN websites and distributed directly to cohort members. We look forward to the release of the compendium in January. Thank you all for joining us again. It was a pleasure hosting you.